All right, shall we start? So this is an informal session. It's not about us talking about things and you guys asking questions. It's more of a dialogue. That's why we set it up this way. But more of about it in a second. Uh, just quick round of introductions. I'm Stefano Cossu, Director of Application Services at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the reason why I got interested in this session is because in the latest couple of years I've been using Fedora as our repository system for the collections, and which is a very big library user base. So I commingled with a lot of librarians, a completely different community, very interesting, and I started noticing some things that we have in common, and that's how I thought about having a session about what are we doing that is similar between libraries, archives, museums, and how we can develop tools and methodologies and practices.
Sure. To your mouth, All right. So hi, I'm David Wilcox. I work with Duraspace, which is the not-for-profit organization that stewards a number of open source pieces of software, one of them being Fedora, and so I'm the product manager for Fedora, which is how I met Stefano and got invited to come along. And so as Stefano mentioned, Fedora has tended to come from the library sphere and used largely by libraries, but increasingly museums, archives, and other sectors are kind of adopting Fedora. And so I'm very interested in where the commonalities lie in terms of use cases, particularly for repositories, but more broadly as well. I'm a librarian myself, and I work quite closely with librarians, but relatively new to museums and archives. So it's a topic of great interest to me.
My name's Niki Krause, and I'm the Application Services Director at the Cleeve Museum of Art. Cleeve Museum of Art has a library, an archives, and a museum, obviously. So I'm interested in the overlap with systems, with metadata, with getting everyone to talk the same language so that we can provide better access to all of our materials to our staff, to our researchers, and to the public. So who else is like me and works in some place with a library, an archives, and a museum all under one roof?
Pretty much all of
very
you.
Good. Very good. How many of you are on the IT side? IT side. Who's on the IT side? Okay. How many of you work primarily in the library side? Okay. Collections? Archives? Hey, very good. How many of you are an MLIS? There you go.
Wow.
It's a room full of friendlies. Yay! Okay, format-wise, you want to give us?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is how we're gonna proceed. We have a few questions that we wanted to propose to you. Of course, we have answers to those questions already, but we also think that those are partial answers, and we want to get your part of the answer. We'll start with some very broad questions about the mission and the experience in general for museums, libraries, and archives, without getting too much into what the mission of a museum or library archive is, but mostly to understand how we can our job can be informed by that mission. And also we'll touch some technical aspects. So we'll talk about metadata and tools, and also user experience and visualization. So, whoops. Okay, it's a little slow. So, okay. So these are the first two questions that we are going to tackle. What role does the physical space of libraries, archives, and museums play in a social context in contrast with their online presence? Who wants to talk about it first? I can start maybe, or you got pictures?
Okay. Hi, I've got pictures because I have pictures for everything. All right. This one's yours, though.
That's me. Okay, I can talk about it. Well, this is just a very small example of how libraries, for example, are evolving and they're adapting to the change in media, and some of them are facing a crisis. And in Germany, libraries are shifting their focus, so they're mostly so they have these huge real estate sometimes, and books are becoming more ethereal, more electronic. So libraries are becoming more places of aggregation, and those two images on the right are probably best exemplify how libraries can be a physical place of interest, either to lounge and read your journal, your newspapers in a common space, or to have an experience that can be only that can only be possible in a space like the historical library, the Harry Potter experience, right? That being in a beautiful architecture, kind of taking it in.
One of the things that I was really interested about when we were talking about this question earlier was the fact that in the Cleeve Museum of Art, we're incorporating a lot of our bibliographic materials, rare books, special collections, and archives material into our showcased special exhibitions. A couple of years back, we had the Last Days of Pompeii, multiple touring. You see the opening gallery there with the yellow walls, and throughout, not in the front room, but in many of the additional galleries, there were cases specially built to house some of those library and archive materials. They were definitely integrated. Same thing with yoga, the art of transformation. You can see one of the very calm and peaceful galleries there. And the exhibition that's open right now, our blockbuster, Painting the Modern Garden, Monet to Matisse, includes not one, but 7 different cases that include library and ephemeral material, including in the agapanthus room where the big water lilies are. So we're definitely seeing a lot of bringing the other areas' collections into the space. Has anybody here heard about Gallery 1 over the past 2 years? Okay. You've probably then seen a picture of Gallery 1's collection wall, probably front on and just the big long 40-foot wall. If you step back a couple of steps from the photographer's perfect vantage point, you'd actually see that there's seating available for people who have children, want to just plop and watch the wall. Behind that seating, if you turned right around when we first launched, there was a library reading room there. It included periodicals. It included some key reference books for people who were interested in exploring more about art before they started out into the permanent collection galleries. It included a reference desk-like table and seating. How many times do you think this area was actually used? Wah wah. Biggest failure ever. We got to the point where we thought, why do people who spend hours upstairs immediately over Gallery 1 in the reference area doing research, working in the library, not even budge one of the magazines on those shelves? Why does nobody sit and look? And I don't know if it was the difference between you're looking at high tech on one side and traditional tech on the other, the scholarly versus the easily accessible, very visual, almost entertainment-like quality. We weren't sure, but this is what it got transferred into. This was installed on Tuesday, and I took the shots right before leaving for the airport, so all the signage isn't up yet. But we now have an additional row of seating facing the wall for those who want to just sit and watch, with iPads that allow the same sort of access to our reference desk, but via an Ask an Expert pop-up and application. You can review questions that were already asked, you can submit your own, but it's all very casual, very informal. It's lounge-like. Right next to that, you'll see the, whoops, now I did it. Right next to that is a story booth that we just put in to celebrate our centennial. We're recording stories of people's experiences with the museum, and that's being baited in this space right now too. So a total change. It's no longer a very traditional, very stodgy reading room. It's a lounge with a story booth. So we'll see how it goes. We don't know yet, because obviously it's been up and running for exactly 2 days.
So if anybody wants to jump in the conversation, you don't have to wait till the end to ask questions or add your own experience to this. But we're interested in, I'm interested in knowing, who has similar experience in mixing bibliographic and iconographic material in exhibitions. Can you? Can I get? Yeah.
I've got a couple microphones just so you can actually.
Yeah, the Cincinnati Art Museum does that pretty regularly with our exhibitions and incorporates our bibliographic material into a lot, and have been working a lot closer with our archivist, who was just made full-time about a month ago. So now we have some additional resources to employ that information, but he's also been digitizing a lot more of our archival material, and we've been using that on social media as well. So I think that's been driving more traffic to our library and our archives and bringing a lot more attention to it by putting in that space. But our library also, we built a new staff office. We've been in there about 2 years now, and our library was moved from this weird back gallery access point to a prominent place where we actually hold public events and things like that now. So I think it's important to incorporate the library into part of just like the regular museum event space as well. And when we have bigger events in the museum, we'll have side conversations with other librarians and University of Cincinnati representatives that kind of get people moving to both areas of the museum. I think that's been really successful.
Yes,
I think it's on.
okay. I had a question about the usage of the library space upstairs and non-usage downstairs. Did you talk to the users? Like, is this the information in the space downstairs? Is it additional to what the people upstairs would find? Okay. So did you talk to the people upstairs and ask them if they knew about the space downstairs and if they used it, or maybe they just saw the digital space and thought that's not for me?
They saw the digital space and just walked away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Art Institute, we have the Ryerson Burton Library that has regularly shows of exhibitions of bibliographic material. Most of the times they are unique pieces or really small series of rare books that are mostly handcrafted, and they are basically like treated as works of art almost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next topic is how does the online LAM, Library Archive and Museum experience relate with the on-site experience, and how are they both evolving? How can on-site technology aid or hinder a visit? I think Niki's answer earlier was a very eloquent case of technology, probably. Becoming almost a divide between the ones who are attracted by technology or by visual, like the visual experience, the immersive experience, and other people who consider technology or that kind of visual technology almost an impediment to or noise or something that is not welcome.
Regarding the online experience and the on-site experience, I wonder if we can think about it two ways, because we often think about how does the online experience bring in people through our doors or not. I think we can think about the online experience in a way as being an experience in and of itself, and that being okay, and then from a second perspective, how the two actually are connected. And I think those should and can be two separate conversations.
Yeah, I agree with that.
just thinking about online versus physical experiences in archives, the pictures you were showing earlier of the lounge spaces within the libraries aren't really an option in an archive when you're dealing with fragile material that are one of a kind. And the online experience, I think, is huge in terms of making it something that can be a casual experience for a user, especially as archives are digitizing more materials and there may be issues with handwriting or that kind of thing, that being in a digital environment where you can manipulate the image gives, especially people who aren't used to working in archives, such an easier time with materials, considering I think many of the researchers that come to our archives are graduate students or doctoral, and as much as we try to bring in younger users, in the physical space it doesn't happen very often, but in the online space, through several sources of information that the archives is really good about putting out, there's a lot of people from a very diverse group who interact with the archival materials that I don't think ever would.
We were lucky enough to put some analytics onto our archival databases and onto our library databases, and were able to sort of track where a lot of the usage was coming from. We were very surprised how much was coming from local school districts. You know, they would get an assignment from an art teacher or whatnot, and all of a sudden there would be a spate of research, and you know, it would be a whole lot of traffic from a couple of school districts for, 2 weeks, and then nothing. But at least they were using it. And you're right, they're definitely using the online space. Those same school districts, many times, were not ones that were close enough that they'd jump on the bus and come to the museum. So, very, very definite cross-use.
Kind of, oh, that's loud. Kind of going off of that, in the archival space, I think the in-house experience is also fundamentally defined by technology in a way that it isn't necessarily at libraries or museums, because the space is meant to be sort of experienced physically. You arrange books so people can browse, or you put objects in galleries, and in archives you can't really do that. You don't let people browse the stacks. It's impossible. They have to use technology to find what they need. And so helping people navigate that experience is very different, I think.
How many people here have, in their archives, made a move to all electronic finding guides? Anybody still using old paper finding guides in a binder? Oh, yeah? Okay. Oh, yeah? Or a mix? Oh, okay. Interesting.
Next. Do you want to go to the next? Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so mission. How can LAMs fulfill the role of information providers by offering the highest quality information possible, as well as reaching out to the broadest audience possible? So, of course, we all want to entice newcomers and help them browse our often huge collections and often diverse collections and find their way through them, but we also want who's enabled or who's just enough curious to drill down the information to do that. So that's a question that I've been asking. I've been asked in many meetings, and I wonder if any of you has had the same question asked, and how that question was asked was answered.
I got pictures.
Do you want to do your?
Yeah.
Click me. Click me, hon. All right. One of the things that the Cleeve Museum of Art did recently, within the past 18 months, we did a complete revamp of our collection online. And part of that included redesigning the metadata section so that when it's collapsed, it looks like tombstone information. Title, artist, materials, dimensions, and then a couple of links at the bottom that you can open if you want. We pocketed everything. So a curatorial description is hidden away. Provenance information that is provided by the library is linked in from their system, but hidden away. Additional information on footnotes, on research, and so forth. All of that is pocketed below the main tombstone information. So if you're a casual user, if you're one of those middle school kids who's doing a project and you just need some quick information, or you just want to satisfy some curiosity about what the thing is, jump in, get that little bit of information, look at the pretty pictures that are creepy like Sleepy Hollow, and then go away. If you're a researcher, you get additional information just for an additional click. Click me again. One of the things that we also did was take some time to integrate our collection online with our library OPAC. So we offer links to additional research materials in the artwork or object information page that take you right to a dynamic search of the library catalog to show you everything you can get a hold of if you just walk upstairs. Anybody else done integration like that to sort of cross the boundaries? No? Okay, cool.
It's interesting how the two pagers are looking completely different from the designy white on black page to the really stark black on white library-like.
There's a funny story about that, because when we were told by our marketing department that the website, after 6 years of a successful and beautifully designed site, was going to have a whole new look, and they showed it to everybody, and it was granite gray on black with white text. Everybody said, "Oh, that's beautiful." And everybody in the library and archives went, "Oh, that's disgusting. There's no way we can show all the text that we need to, all the tables and tables of information, all those records about bibliographic and archives materials on a black background." Nobody would stand for it. So we ended up doing a design at the time that was black on the public website, white on the library website, but identical graphics. Over the past 3 years, both of them have been slightly redesigned so that the original graphics with those little chiclets across the top next to the logo that you still see on the library site have completely disappeared from the public site. They used to be much closer together. They're going apart, and hopefully in another year they'll come back together again with no black involved.
I'd like to ask a question of everybody, whether they've considered or in any way desirous of presenting in the online space the capacity to search once and get results across all three of these things: collections, libraries, and archives, commingled heterogeneously. Anyone? Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of our... sorry.
Normalizing archival and bibliographic format and museum format. And even museum format, it has a certain exclusivity to it. And trying to find, who wrote it, who penned it, or who made it, there's only one entity for that. So you can call it kangaroo if you want. You know what I mean? It's just a word. It's bringing back the data together that presents who the creator was, or the statement of responsibility, or the recipient. But to the public, they don't care about what we need to have. It's our responsibility to bring that together and present it to them in a common narrative language that's easily understood.
Yeah, that's one of my, and we're gonna get to the metadata and that in a minute, but yeah, but this is one of our main challenges for the dams that we're building, to kind of tie everything together. Why would you not want to search for a book in the museum library about some artist and know what is on view in our museum about that artist, or all the publications that have been made that we have available about that artist in the library, and pull up a description of the artist in the collections website.
If I just give an example just of something that may in a couple of months begin to provide a public example of exactly what we're talking about. I'm working on a project with a very small but interesting private collection in Texas, Texas Coastal Bend Collection, which has this real mix of archival and bibliographic and traditional cultural object material. And because they're new, they don't have a physical space and never will, and they're completely free of all of the prejudice and all of that underpinning of ideas of segregation between these things. And so when they came to us to help them think about presenting it, they just naturally said, well, we're going to serve this all together, right? And so we're starting to build a prototype, and anyone who's interested in talking about it will tweet out about it in a couple of months, and hopefully it'll begin at least the beginning of a conversation of what that aggregated discovery space can look like.
So just to put a little bit of historical context on this, right? So next year, April 2016, it's the 20th anniversary of the Museums in the Web conference. So I have up here from the very first Museums of the Web conference, 1997. Is this not working?
No, it's working. I was wondering who
right.
else wanted to
Well,
speak
I was going to quote Eleanor Fink, right, who, of course, gave the opening keynote at that conference in 1997. At that point in time, she was director of the Getty Information Institute, which, of course, is no longer extant. All right, and she was saying that what's this world going to look like in 2005? Which, of course, seemed like a long time away, right? And she says by 2005, all right, successful models for integrating our cultural heritage have emerged, and that professors and students, curators and school children, you and I are able to search the online universe seamlessly, as if all the images, text, and about culture were available in one institution, right? And so what happened? What happened to our future? Right? We're 10 years past this, right? Absolutely, but you know as well as I do that we're not at that point yet, right? And to put it even more historical context, I don't have it on the screen here, but I have it in my office in Tallahassee, a copy of the proceedings from the 1889 first meeting of the British Museum Association, and number one on their agenda was to find a way to integrate a collections list across all the museums in the United Kingdom, and they had no idea how to do that.
Well, in all fairness, there was a great college try, all the museums in Canada via CHIN. Excellent, excellent try. Right, and there was also a try that's still up online at the Mercer Museum. Anybody here from Mercer Museum that offers their library archives and artworks, objects, all through a single interface with a really cute puppy dog logo?
Smithsonian actually has what they call Smithsonian's Collection Search Center, which accepts records from all the units. And it's interesting because it automatically takes all the library records that are produced. It takes any archival finding aid that is NAD, that is fed through CIRRUS. And it takes anything from specimen records to artwork records, anything that is submitted from the museums. Generally, they don't submit all their records, but they at least submit some of them. And it even includes things from Smithsonian channels, sometimes YouTube clips. It's amazing, but the part I find really interesting is how many of the staff default to using the older systems that don't feed into it. I work on a small grant-funded project, and initially we didn't work in any of the schemas that were common across the institution. So the one place that we could put all of our records was Collection Search Center. So we worked with the OCI, with our office with our tech office, who created the system based on technology that was available, and they're actually working on the next version of it to feed our records directly in. So that is what I'm used to using, and I love the fact that I can find materials that relate to, I work with field documentation for natural sciences. I can find stuff from natural history. I can find things from the American Indian Museum. And yet when I talk even to the archive staff about how to search for our records, which make up about 8,000 of the 2.1 million records, there's a lot of instruction that has to be given for them to find it, and it has to be renewed. So I've seen it done, and it's beautiful, but it is incredibly intimidating once you get all of those formats together and all that information together. That part I don't know if they've quite figured out.
So making the filtering easy, eliminate what you don't want, has to be seamless and effortless, or people are going to keep reverting to the limited set. I would agree with that.
So it boils down to user experience and interface design, because the data is there, right?
And as someone who's trying to solve some of those problems about those interfaces, the challenge is that the design patterns don't exist yet for a lot of these things. This is truly untraveled territory. And there have been all sorts of valiant and sometimes very interesting examples. You've all seen the graph database hairballs, right? You know, and they're great to a point. They don't really scale. I could go on and on. But there's an enormous amount of design thinking that's going to happen real soon in order to take full advantage of the things that Chen Sing and her folks are doing. There's such awesome work at collections.si.edu.
Oh, hi. Yes, I wanted to go back to the comment about the attempt to search collections across sites. And yes, Chin launched Artifacts Canada in 1998, so you were able to search not all Canadian museum collections, but a lot of Canadian museum collections. And then for various reasons, we've talked about updating it, and that didn't happen. But now, because we hadn't updated it in that time, now we are actually looking at linked open data. And we're doing a small test project with linked open data, and definitely we see the potential, at least for linking to other resources that have been made available in that format too. So, yeah, there's hope.
There's always hope.
There's
Always
always
hope.
hope.
Job security.
Well, I don't know about that.
So materials collected. Museums have publications and sometimes libraries within them, as well as archives. Libraries have special collections made up of unique or limited edition objects. Are the two institutions closer than we think in terms of what they collect and how they catalog it? And to this I would add archives that, in my opinion, kind of span both realms. They kind of
Absolutely.
provide the substrate or for
I have a
both.
picture. This is the research and reading room for the museum archives at the Cleeve Museum of Art. And that beautiful marble mantelpiece that you see installed there is actually an accessioned part of their collection, that when they got the space for the new researchers room, they decided to put on display instead of keeping in storage. So our particular museum archives has absolute tons of physical objects as part of their collections, totally separate from the museum's permanent collection of artworks.
And I think so many, I mean, this probably isn't new, but there are so many exhibitions that are including archival materials, particularly looking at contemporary art and the curatorial practice of elevating that to collection. I think right now I am putting together the first everything for a tiny arts organization that is dealing with a record of performance, a notable record of performance. We have the archives of our founder, Robert Wilson, so it's 20th century theater. Then practicing artists, we have a professional archivist dealing with those concerns, but because it's performance, so much of the access to it is going to be through documentation. And I guess we also, it goes on and on. We live and work in a space with objects. It's like this times 5,000. It's every day we're like sitting on or next to something that's accessioned, and so it's a whole other thing. But one thing that I've thought about a lot, because I have the daunting problem and the luxury, as was said earlier, that I'm not locked into any systems and standards, but certainly I'm looking to do that because my training is as a librarian. So given that we have a lot of record of performance and giving this practice of, we're sending things out of our archive to major venues in the world, and we're also receiving back from all the major theaters in the world, like things that we go. And I think it's particularly common now that we're looking back at this long tail era of performance as an artwork. And so some of this is subject driven, but also in terms of our practice with the archivist and with my systems work. As soon as we get into massive digital or any kind of digital access to media, whether it's born digital photography and video, or whether it's something that we went through a process of digitizing, those are automatically objects, right? So whether it's the professional practice to do, you don't do line item cataloging in an archive. Like, we all get that. It's like, okay. But you do if you're going to be sending it out and treating it like an art collection object, right? You have to go through all your loan procedures. And you do if you get into a digital facsimile or a born digital record of something. I need to know quite a bit of I can't just have a box and say documentation of Bob's performance, at such or other city. I have to, when I'm receiving back and ingesting, I necessarily have to do an object level cataloging if I'm going to be either sharing, and it's a whole other thing, and I should be, sharing out the data, but also just in terms of identifying and being able to credit and everything else. So I guess, okay, that was long-winded because I think about this stuff all day long. But I think that it's, for me, there's something, because I have the luxury of looking at it holistically in a small microcosm with thousands of moving parts. I think that it's this, I can afford to get out of the departmentalizing and even, professionalizing that has to happen with different types of collections. And for me, it comes down a lot to, particularly with archives, but are we treating something as an object, and what is the life of this thing? And then I have to look and consider that. So I might have common practices. And then my metadata is a whole other thing that I won't riff on right now. But it does, again, it affords me the opportunity to think a whole lot. And the short of it is that I'm using my dams to be that crosswalk between the different collections, because I really have to have it. And nobody in this tiny audience and realm, I mean, it's not like your big institutions and your art institute and everything else. Nobody is going to silo this type of content. They're going to come in through, because it's almost always an artistic and a curatorial, and that is serendipitous browsing. I mean, I guess you already know this, but nobody's going to care whether it's an archive material or a collection, especially when I'm in an environment like this fireplace where everything's on top of each other and we don't even make that distinction.
So I didn't find it confusing at all. It was fascinating, and it makes me wonder whether the traditional apprenticeship that we all went through, either as library science or archives or as registrars and collections managers, what does it mean to train someone now when really this is a blended environment? Why are we still thinking in these segregated manners about how we train people? Does there need to be an influence back on the organizations that are providing the training and the master's degrees?
I think so. I have the luxury of having started in this business in special collections in a historical society library. Had no library skill, came from historic preservation. So that was really crazy. And ended up going from there to historic house management with a museum collection and manuscript papers. And then from there, I moved on to an art museum. And in each instance, I was responsible for the collection and the management of the collections, whether it be a building, a paper, a rug, somebody's boots, whatever. And when I came through all these professional practices, there's a common language to everything. It's about the thing, something about the thing. There's only basic information about a thing. You start with that. And then you just, as long as you're consistent and you use all that sort of buzzwords about managing good data, it will all happen for you. So whether it's a derivative or not, it's still part of a whole, right? So, but you can get lost in the complexity of all of these professional practices. You've got to take your head up out of it and say, what is it that I've really got here? And what is it that I need to, what do people want to know? They want to know who made it, when they made it, what it was, when it is, what it's about, and where is it? And if you sort of stay true to the core, the rest of it is just like icing on the cake, and you just keep layering it out. So when I look at these records, when you see a lot of records online, you'll see that sort of basic presentation of the ID. They call it the tombstone for a reason. It's the identity. So you've got this identity, right? And for most people, that also means a visualization. You have to see it. We're a culture of seeing. So you have this thing that you can see. You have some vital information about it. And then as your interest is drawn in, then you present the layers as they come out. Each practice has different layers that they present. Each practice approaches the material different. You would never item level catalog an archive, but you would never not item level catalog in a museum. I have to go down in flatware. I have numbering schemas that go down 5 levels for flatware services for 24 teaspoons, dee-dee-dee-dee-da, and it all is a set. So if you think about it as parts of wholes, parts of sets, parts of things, you can manage it. It kind of comes to be sort of simple. I think we over professionalize it. That's just my take.
While I agree with that, I think there's a level of specificity in each domain that is important to that domain. So flattening out libraries, archives, and museums, there's kind of I wouldn't say danger, but I do feel like each has its own toolkits and specificities that need to be underlined in many ways. And, that's a good question. I mean, I think you need to, at the Whitney, we just recently consolidated into a new department called Research Resources, which has the library archives, special collections, and the permanent collection documentation. And what's been very instructive is to crosswalk between what those are. And I feel rather than flattening, I think it's an issue of crosswalking. And I think there is an issue of how do you translate rather than how do you flatten. And we deal with this with special collections in many ways because our librarian catalogs using, ACR2/RDA, we catalog the collection using CCO, and the content standards vary differently because the audiences are different. And I think understanding what those crosswalks are more important than trying to flatten it out to the end user and saying, okay, if this information is valid for the library sector, what information is valid for the museum sector? And it's interesting because when you start seeing the way people describe things within them, each one of them is valid, but how do you make it a holistic approach to understanding why you would put number of pages in a library catalog but not in a museum catalog, right? That's how we do it internally. There's different cataloging practices, but I think what's instructive is seeing how they crosswalk, and then you start understanding what the end user may want.
Yeah, that actually takes us to the harmonization concept, and I would like to keep going because that's where we tie in. So efforts to harmonize concepts between libraries and museums, that means map terms that are common to both, are underway. See this is a terminal acronym, FERBER. FERBER, yeah. They should change it. Also, portals such as Europeana and DPLA are aggregating resources from libraries and museums alike, providing generic repositories of cultural heritage. Who is implementing this? This is a question for you at an institutional level. Who's trying to harmonize their content?
Okay, I just want to go back a couple of steps. Well, one, in answer to this, right? Anybody who's ever crosswalked anything from their collection through the Dublin core to someone else's metadata standard knows what sort of a nightmare you end up after having done that, especially if you're going through DC Simple. Back to the issue was raised about the education side of this, right? So as a library science professor who also teaches in museum studies, right, I can tell you that it's not the faculty and it's not the students that are in the way of bringing these together. Right, so some of you might know that back in 2008, I ran an international workshop where we brought together the heads of 50 different library science, archival studies, and museum studies programs to address that very question. And everybody agreed, and over the course of several days, we came up with a unified curriculum, and nothing ever happened because the entrenched silos within the universities are too much for even the heads of those departments to get around. Okay, so.
So I'm just going to make an unapologetic argument for not dumbing down the harmonization, even if that means backbreaking difficult work over long periods of time. I think that in the long term yields the kind of richness of extraction of all the deep expression of meaning and nuance that's in all our carefully prepared metadata at all these levels of detail. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's hard. Yes, the toolkits aren't mature yet to do this at scale. Yes, the harmonization and reconciliation problem is difficult, but I really hope we don't take our eyes off the prize, because long term, the full potential of this lies in not just reducing this to 15 fields of commonality.
Yeah, I very much agree with you, but I'm still asking what are the tools that we have now to do this. February is very, very new, and maybe we need a little bit a very brief description of what February is, and the European data model, unless everybody knows what we're talking about.
Right. We had one comment that we wanted to get in. Do you still want? Sure. You still had something you want to say?
Oh, just something fun to color it when you're talking earlier about thingness and common core of metadata. Just again to put this out there, I'm in another universe where I've got a lot of things, but I also have a whole lot of hundreds of performances. And sometimes what you're describing is not a thing, and the work of an archive or a librarian is often to describe back out what it is that's landed there or that you have acquired. I mean, I'm trying to be respectful here, but quick. And that's not the same as, maybe like the role usually of a researcher or somebody is to make that definitive list of everything. And because I have one artist, that's just interesting to think about, like, how does this stuff relate to conceptual works and performance? I know mostly in this room we're trained to deal with the object in front of us and describe back out, but a lot of what I'm dealing with cycles around a career that's not it's something happened. So there's thing and there's something happen, and those are kind of my two lists that I've been working with. It's just interesting because I think we're moving in that direction as we add to these museum collections.
Yeah.
Here you go.
That's my picture. That just a very brief in passing comment, and that's what we have to deal with in a museum. So this is a moving installation that is made up of several digital files that are the actual artwork, that they are digital born artwork, and we have projectors that change with every installation. We can have 2, 3, 4, depends on the room that they're installed in, and we have props, we have wiring diagrams, we have installation instruction, installation maps, and so the artwork is not anymore a piece of stone or a painting or even just a simple video. It's something. It's a concept. It's an intellectual product, and we have to take this into account. But also, we don't want to penalize the archival and the cataloging process of very simple objects.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond about the dumbing down process, because I feel a little dirty because I do spend a lot of time dumbing down records. We act as a service hub for DPLA, but it's a certain goal, really. It's not as though those two things are mutually exclusive. It's just you you're taking the original record and dumbing it down. You're making it available in that search interface. The DPLA model is interesting because there is that initial search, and as the woman up here mentioned, that you can search on these common fields, dates and people and so on. Once you get to the record, you go back to the host institution, and then you get the full richness of the data, depending on how they've done it on that site, if they've done it on that site.
Never defend not doing anything when you have something you can do, and certainly the aggregators, whether it's ArtStore or DPLA or Europeana, or any of the ventures that go back in time. I started doing CME in the 90s and VRA and so on and so forth, ad nauseum. There's absolute value in there. I guess I'm just saying that what I see then is a 20-year history of getting beyond that. It's also the standards given to you to describe the full richness of the data, and so that's where the CDOC CRM as an ontology and the extensions it makes to Ferber, which is Ferberu, and that connective tissue between these ontological models, that's the gateway to get beyond the reductive ultimate value of those minimally reductive.
We have 7 minutes and we haven't even gotten into visualization.
There's also a
Stefano really wants to talk about Ferberu.
there's also, just very quickly, there's also a design thinking aspect to this that has to be brought to bear that often isn't, right? So the whole idea about DPLA serving as a clearinghouse for things and then people will follow the links back, it all sounds great, right? Until you start looking and seeing a lot of people don't follow the links back. So what can we do, or they don't want to, right? So is there something we can do about the design to encourage that, or is that really more of an educational aspect?
Both.
Yeah, I mean, I think both Ferberu and the EDM, European CDM, are really useful and very flexible models. Probably Ferberu is the most comprehensive effort to harmonize library and museum material. We don't have the time to go over the description, but what I find daunting, I think those are models that are more meant to be read by machines than by humans. So they are so complex. They are complex for ontologists, let alone for catalogers or for content managers. So you need an abstraction layer for the cataloger and for the consumer, because you have so many terms. You have like expression, you have a product, you have you have so many entities.
There's 4 hops in the graph.
Yeah.
The object and its title, and that's not, the human doesn't
Yeah.
care about those 4 hops in the graph.
Yeah, you have a work, actor, work conception, expression creation, manifestation. What do these things mean? First off, secondly, how do you tie them to your curatorial cataloging practice? Third, how do you present it to the user that definitely don't want to hear about all these concepts? They just want to see stuff on the screen. Who did this? So that's definitely a hurdle, and that there is definitely a lot of work to be done. And the tools. Who writes software for that handles this ontology?
Well, the other issue is who has the skill set for this, and do you have to find someone who's a Wikipedia editor as well as someone who is a traditional cataloger and sort of squish them together? What do you need to be able to support entering all this?
Well, you have to have your experts in each one of the ways that we go about that is I think of it as an orchestra, and all of my experts put into one common data system their expertise. So the registrars put theirs in, the curators put theirs in, the conservators put their stuff in. Everybody puts their stuff in with a data standard that we can all use, because there's no one person who has all that knowledge base, nor should. And then then the goal is to make it so that you can export it out or share it out or harvest it out or do whatever you need to do with it out that can meet these other systems. But no one person's going to have all that expertise. No one, and nor should they.
Well, I did want to mention just, well, so we have the Ferber up here, but another issue that's come up, of course, is things like data modeling. I don't know how many of you have heard about this effort, but this sort of, coming from the Fedora community, but not Fedora specific. So within repositories, you could take something like a book. Well, just because you could have two different institutions that model books completely differently, and they're still talking about books, but I mean, whether you have a complex object or whether you break it out so each page is its individual object or anything like that. And we've seen these even amongst Fedora implementations where different people who run Hydra and Fedora will represent books and different things in different ways. So more recently, this is something that's come out of the community in terms of can we all agree on a kind of minimal basic data model that we can layer specificity on top of? But at the end of the day, is it possible for all of us to kind of describe digital assets that we're managing in these systems in terms of a very simple model, that ultimately things are collections of objects which have associated files with them? And of course, that's a very, very low level. On top of this, you would have to layer additional specificity, and the model actually does provide for that, having other ontologies and stuff. But the thing about talking about linked data, which is what this is basically a linked data model, is in order for things to truly be interoperable, you kind of have to speak the same language. And having a model where we have at some minimal level, you're representing collection objects and files using the same kind of identifiers and the same kinds of relationships. Even if you're layering additional relationships on top of these, because with linked data, of course, you can have as many relationships as you want and name your objects as many things, given them a number of types as you want. So I wanted to bring this up as just something that's happening kind of in the repository community, but extends beyond that. So this is the reason this is the Portland model and not the Fedora model or something like that, is that there's nothing implementation specific about a model like this. This is just a community of people agreeing that they're going to implement this model along with whatever other specificity they want in their repositories. And we've seen this in libraries. We're also seeing this in museums. I mean, I know you guys are looking at this at the Art Institute. The folks at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art have taken a look at this, and others. So really, this is just an effort to kind of get this out there. It's something that's, we actually have a lot of interest in getting this into more of kind of like a W3C type model, and we've worked with folks like Rob Sanderson, who's involved with the W3C, is very involved with this effort as well, the Portland effort. It has a dedicated mailing list and a community of practice. So something, we're getting towards the end of our session, but it was something I wanted to encourage people to take a look at if you're interested in kind of some minimal level of interoperability at a data modeling level. If we can all just kind of mean the same thing when we say something is a book, it really buys us a lot, even if you later want to add your own specificity on top of it. So it's I think it's an effort that has a lot of promise.
So what's our last question?
Yeah, I think we can take this into the hallway.
Yeah, we have like 1 minute left, but
just to read it out loud. So yeah, how important is visualization for LAMPS, especially in regard to linked data and complex data sets? Which online and on-site efforts are most notable, and what can we learn from non-culture sectors in regard to visualizing linked data? And I'll bundle that up with the next one. Image delivery is probably one of the main points of context between LAMPS, and the interest around AAAF and related tools confirms this. Could this be one common ground for all cultural heritage institutions?
yeah, AAAF is a lot of promise. I mean, we all deal with images, right?
From an art museum perspective, the image, that's where the cultural currency starts, right? It's the curators and everybody else wants to look first. So if you're not bringing images into that sphere of influence, then yeah, you're missing something.
Yeah, I think it's got a tremendous promise. We're all working with images, and if we just all, again, just agree to do things the same way, because why do it differently? You gain so much by using a standard that's interoperable, being able to share things in a way. And this isn't something the end users really notice, but the people that are actually working with the infrastructure will be tremendously happy if they can just leverage an API or leverage a standard to pull back image information or to push it out to the world without having to maintain a whole bunch of custom code and hack around things. So I think there's a lot of value to efforts like this. But we are basically at the end of the hour, so I think we just had our, So thanks everyone for joining us, and we're happy to continue the conversation in the hallway afterwards. This is just our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with any one of us, but we'll be around for the rest of the day as well. So thanks everyone for coming.